Namaste everyone, I am Gyan and you are learning computer science with Python for class 11th. In this video, we are going to learn about operating system in brief. Now, can you tell me few examples of operating system? Yes, you are correct. That is the Windows 10, Windows 7, Ubuntu, if you have seen it. Okay, and on your mobile phone, this is Android. So all are the operating systems. All are the examples of operating system. But now the question is, why we need operating system? What are the benefits of using operating system on your laptop, on desktop, or on the mobile phone? Why we cannot have just apps installed on our phone? Why we need the operating system? So let's see the functionality of the operating system. Suppose that you have a computer. You have a computer. Either this computer is a laptop or desktop or your smartphone. You know all these three names are the various types of the computer. A laptop is a kind of computer, a desktop is a kind of computer, and your smartphone is also a kind of computer. So you have any of these three in which there is only one application installed. Let's say you have just word processor installed on your machine. Okay, there is no operating system. So you have only one word processor installed on the machine and you have no operating system installed on it. Now tell me, if there is no operating system, what are the various responsibilities of this word processor? The first responsibility of this word processor will be to keep the computer up and running, to keep the computer up and running. The second responsibility of this word processor will be what? To access the hardware. Okay, means the word processor have to save the things on the disk, or the word processor have to show the content on the monitor. Okay, the word processor should be able to accept input from the keyboard. You may say the word processor always does this, even in the presence of operating system. But I want to say you, if the operating system is present on your system, then all kinds of hardware access will be handled by the operating system. So if the operating system is present on your computer, then word processor never tries to access any hardware. The word processor just say the operating system to access the hardware for it. But since we are assuming we do not have any operating system, so word processor itself will have to access the hardware. And one biggest disadvantage of not having operating system on your computer is you cannot install anything else than word processor. Means you cannot install more than one applications on your computer, because if there is no operating system, then two or more applications cannot run together, because in the absence of operating system, the applications has the responsibility to keep the system up and running, and if one application takes that responsibility, it will use the whole environment of the computer for itself and will not allow anything else to execute with it. So if you look at the situation more carefully, then all the softwares, all the applications running in your computer have few common things to do. All the applications, all the applications have to access hardware. Okay, all the applications want the hardware of computer to be managed properly, to be managed properly. Applications also may want to connect to internet. Applications may also want to connect to internet, to connect to internet. Applications also want to be secured. Applications never want to be hacked by someone else. So all the applications always want to be secured. We as a user want more than one applications, more than one applications to execute simultaneously on the machine, which is not possible if you don't have the operating system. Okay, because if any one application started managing a whole computer, it will not allow other applications to work with it. So why don't take these common requirements of all the applications on your computer and give them to a special software called the operating system. Okay, so take out all these requirements, all these requirements from the application, from the applications, and give all discussed responsibilities to a special software called operating system, or in short you can call it OS. So now you have given the responsibility of accessing hardware to the operating system. Not only responsibility, you have given the right of accessing hardware to the operating system. Okay, you have given all the management stuff, all the housekeeping stuff of the computer to the operating system. You have given the right to connect to internet, that means the right to send the packets, to right to send the information on the internet to the operating system. You have given the operating system a responsibility to keep the system and applications secure, and you have made the operating system such that more than one user applications can execute simultaneously over the operating system. So you have given these responsibilities to the operating system. So now you have this structure. You have the various applications. I am writing A1, A2. This denotes the application number 1, application number 2, application number 3, application number 4, application number 5, etc. Beneath of these applications, you have the operating system. Operating system. The operating system is also called OS. And beneath of this operating system, you have the hardware. See, accessing the hard disk or SSD, accessing the RAM, accessing the CPU, or accessing the internet. All these accesses comes under the hardware access. Okay, so whenever any application has to do a hardware access, either memory or CPU or disk, then that application should contact to the operating system to access the hardware. Again, this application should contact the operating system to access the hardware. The application number A3 should contact the operating system to access the hardware. So all these applications cannot directly access the hardware. They always need to contact the operating system to access the hardware, and the operating system accesses the hardware for them. And that's how you have taken the common responsibilities from all the applications and given these responsibilities to the operating system. Now, any application vendor who creates the application is free of writing the code for accessing the hardware. Now onwards, with having the operating system, any application vendor writes a code to how to tell the operating system to access the hardware. Okay. Now, in the code of applications, you do not write a code to how to access the hardware, but you write a code to what to say the operating system to access the hardware. Now, let's see something more about the operating system. In the chapter 1 of this book, we have seen this figure. In this figure, you have the computer, and the computer has two parts. One part is called the CPU and other part is called the primary memory. The primary memory. You take the data from the memory and store the data on the memory. Then after you have something called input output device. You have the input device, you have the output device, you have the output device, and you have the secondary storage, means hard disk drive or SSD, secondary storage. The two arrows or bidirectional arrows says that the data flows from the input device to the computer and from the computer to the input device. So all the input devices, output devices, and secondary storage like hard disk drive or SSD are not considered as the part of the computer. Your computer is just these two. Your computer is just CPU and primary memory. That's it. Okay. Now, as you can see here, CPU talks directly to the primary memory, not to the secondary storage. But at the same time, the primary memory is volatile. So you always need to keep your file on the secondary storage so that even if you switch off your computer, your file stays there. Therefore, when you want to access a file, that file first goes to the primary memory, then after it can be accessed by the CPU, who takes your file from the secondary storage to the primary memory. That is the operating system. When you double click on any file to open it, that file first goes to the primary memory before it gets accessed by the CPU, and that transfer is done by the operating system. And I also want to remind you, the secondary storage also comes under the input and output device. Normally, these three blocks can be written as a one block called IO device. So this is one job of operating system, to take the files and the programs from secondary storage to the primary memory and from the primary memory to the CPU. Okay, the operating system also takes all the processes in the primary memory to the CPU in certain order. Now let's dive deep more into the concept of operating system and see what other stuff an operating system can do. So whatever we discussed up to now, I think from that discussion, now you know that the operating system is a resource manager. Means whatever the hardware your computer system have, all the hardware are managed by the operating system. So your operating system is a resource manager. But what an operating system manages as the resource manager. So let's see operating system as a resource manager. Resource manager. Whenever I write OS, that means I am writing operating system, OS. Okay. So you know everything is managed by the operating system. Operating system takes the program from the disk to memory and from the memory to CPU. So operating system manages the disk, operating system manages the memory, that how many programs together can be in the memory, because the RAM, the primary memory, is always limited. So operating system manages the disk, operating system manages the memory, and operating system itself takes the applications from the memory to the CPU. So the operating system also manages the CPU. All these hardwares like CPU, like memory, like disk are called resources of the computer. Therefore, we can say that an operating system is a resource manager of a computer. But before I talk how an operating system is a resource manager, let me discuss something more about how an executable program executes on the computer. So the executable program remains on your disk as .exe file. Okay, something .exe. So an exe file remains on your disk, either SSD or SSD. When I'm talking about the exe file, I'm only talking about the Windows. Okay. In Linux, an executable file need not to have an extension like .exe. But in Windows, every executable file has an extension called .exe. So If an exe file is on the hard disk drive, then that exe file remains in the dormant state. Means a zombie which is dead right now and cannot do anything. Okay, but to execute this exe file, that means to make this zombie alive, you need to send it to the memory so that CPU can take this exe file from the memory and can execute it. Therefore, the operating system takes this exe file from the disk to the memory. Memory means RAM. Take this exe file from the disk to the memory. And from the memory, this exe file goes to the CPU. Of course, all these movements of exe file are done by the operating system. So if an exe file is present on the hard disk, to execute that exe file first goes to the RAM, and from the RAM it goes to the CPU by the operating system. And whenever this exe file remains on the hard disk drive, it's like a dead zombie which is doing nothing. But as soon as this exe file goes to the RAM, it becomes alive. Okay, and when this exe file becomes alive, then this exe file starts executing by the CPU. So when this exe file becomes alive, it changes its structure. So when this exe file goes to the RAM, it becomes a process, means the zombie becomes alive. When an exe file converts into the process, then that exe file looks like this into the memory. That means the process means when the exe file is alive, it becomes a process, and the process looks like this. It has a stack, then it has something called the free area. After the free area, the process has the heap. Then after, you have the global variables, a place for the global variables, also called the data section. But I am writing only those terminologies which are used in your book. So after the heap, you have global variables. Global variables. And after the global variables, you have program code. Program code. Now look at here. This is the free area. Free area. Okay. And the stack and the heap grows towards each other. So this is the conceptual memory map of a process. So this is the conceptual memory map of a process. So this is what happens when you execute an executable file stored on the disk. Okay, I'm not going in that depth, but this is very interesting to study. If you study the operating system subject in your BTech, then you will learn all these things. Now, coming to what the resources are managed by the operating system. The first resource which is managed by the operating system are the processes. Are the processes. Process management. As I already told you, a program, that means an exe file, in the execution is called the process. And there are dozens of processes executing in your computer. All those processes are need to manage. Let's see how many processes are executing right now in my computer. Right click here on the taskbar, open task manager, and here, okay, I just have clicked on the more details. It was fewer details, something like that. So you have to click on the more details. Now see these many processes you have. I have only two user processes right now. The paint I am using and the task manager. And other are the background processes. That means I am not interacting with these processes. If I talk about the background processes, then there are two situations. Either an user started a process and stopped interaction with the process, or an operating system has started the process just to manage the computer, just to keep the computer up and running. So all those processes are called the background processes. either started by the user, with which the user right now is not interacting, are the background processes, or a process started by the operating system just to keep the computer up and running. Such processes are also called the background processes. As you can see here, the Dropbox was started by me, but right now I am not interacting with it. That's how the Dropbox is a background process. So now the question is how to manage such hundreds of processes. All these processes are executing, and all these processes have same look like just we have seen. All these processes have the stack, all these processes have the heap, all these processes have a section for the global variables, all these processes have a section for the program code. So all these processes are executing in the memory. Okay, and all are having the same look. All these zombies are alive. They were on the disk, but these are taken to the RAM by the operating system, and now these zombies are alive. Now these executable files are processed. Now the question is how the operating system manages that many processes in the RAM. Means if you have that many processes in the RAM, then who will get the CPU? Okay, who is going to get the CPU for the next time? So this is managed by the operating system, and this is called the process management. Okay, who will get the CPU next time? This management is called the process management, and this process management is done by the operating system. After the process management, the other job of operating system is called process scheduling. See, during the process management, an operating system decides that which process is ready to go on the CPU for execution. But what part of operating system actually takes a process to the CPU is called the process scheduler. The process scheduler takes a process which is ready to go to the CPU to the CPU. Okay. The third one is the memory management. Memory management. See, how many processes are there in the memory? We have seen that there are hundreds of processes and we have limited amount of memory. Okay, we can have a heavy software executing in the memory. We can have a big file present in the memory. Who does the memory management? Okay, if there are such number of processes, such number of files, big files, big processes can be present in the memory, then who manages the memory? That is the operating system which manages the memory. Then after IO management. IO management. What about IO management? As I told you, input output means everything. Input output means which is not the part of the memory, not the part of CPU, not the part of cache memory. Rest of all the things are the input output, even your disk. So how to manage the disk? How to access the various files on the disk? The internet management also comes under the input output management. How to receive a packet, a data from the internet, how to send the data on the internet. This management also comes under the input output management. So these are the four managements your book discuss about the operating system. I am not that satisfied with the content of your book, but this is the book everyone is following, and in this book there are four kinds of managements are discussed. Okay, I am going through the book of Sumita Arora. Hopefully you are getting my points. Now let's see the process management in more detail. Process management. When a program needs to be executed, it approaches the operating system that, hello operating system, I want to execute. You know that a program resides on the disk. If I say program, that means I am saying about exe file. Exe file is the program. So when a program want to execute, it contacts the operating system that take me to the memory. When the program goes to the memory, it becomes the process. And who takes the program to the memory is the process scheduler. Now, being in the memory, a program is ready to execute on the CPU. And when a program is in the memory, is ready to execute in the CPU, it becomes a process. So, depending on the various states of the process, that initially it was a program, was in the dormant state, then it goes to the memory, then it goes to the CPU. There are various states defined for a process. A process has various states. Okay, the process goes through various states. In the first state, the process remains in the start state. The first state of the process is the start state. What do you mean by start state? I am writing here. What do you mean by start state? This is the initial state of the process. The initial state of the process. Okay. Then you have ready state. Ready state. After start state, it goes to the ready state. This is the ready state. Okay. From the ready state, it goes to running state. This is the running state. Okay. Now let's first discuss about the ready state. When a process is ready to go to the CPU, then that process is called in the ready state. So when a process is ready to go to the CPU and just waiting for the operating system scheduler to take it to the CPU. Okay, so in that case, the process remains in the ready state. Then when the process really gets a CPU time, that means the process gets the CPU for its execution. Then that state is called the running state. So you have the running state. Running state. What is running state? Tell me. Here in this state, the process being executed by the CPU. Process being executed by the CPU. When a process was running on the CPU, the CPU was executing the various instructions in the process. And on a certain instruction, the CPU found that there is need to access the input output. So in that case, the CPU cannot more run this process and says this process to wait in the waiting state, and when your input output is done, then come back. Okay, so in that case, the process waits in the waiting state until its input output operation is over, and when the input output operation is over and that process again needs the CPU time, then this process again goes to the ready state, and from the ready state it will again be picked by the CPU scheduler to give it to the CPU for the running state. So this cycle keeps on going until the process finishes its last instruction. So when the process finishes its last instruction, the process terminates. Terminates. So these are the various states of a process. So we have written about the running state. Now let's see what is in the waiting state. What happens in the waiting state? The process is waiting for some resource or input output in the waiting state. Okay, the process is waiting, is waiting. The process is waiting for some resource source. Okay, the process is waiting for some resource in the waiting state, for some IO resource. In your book, it has been written that the process is waiting for some resource in the waiting state. They have skipped the word IO, but the CPU, the memory, is also a resource. Here in the waiting state, the process is not waiting for the CPU. The process is waiting for the input output, for some external resources, not the CPU and memory. That's why I have added the word the input output before the resource. In the waiting state, the process is waiting for some IO resource. Hopefully you are getting it. Then last is the terminated state, that means terminated or exit state. Terminated or exit state. So I think you know what happens in the terminated or exit state is that the process is over. The process is over. So this is the state, the various states of the process. Okay, but there is one more question: how the CPU executes instruction of the process. Okay, because what is there in the process are various instructions to execute. So how a CPU executes the instructions of a process? So the question is how CPU executes the instructions of a ready process, of a ready process. How the CPU executes the instruction of a ready process. Okay, the first stage to go through is to execute the instruction of ready process is the fetch state. The fetch state. In the fetch state, the control unit of the CPU brings the next instruction to be executed in the memory. Okay, that is called the instruction fetch. So while executing a process, the first step is to fetch the instruction. The second step is to decode the fetched instruction. Decode the fetched instruction. Decode means the CPU decides, the control unit decides what to do with the fetched instruction. That is called the decoding of the instruction. And then you execute the instruction. Execute the instruction. This is the actual execution of the instruction. Okay. And the fourth one is store the result of execution in the memory. Store the result of execution in the memory. This is the fourth stage. And this whole cycle, the CPU keeps on doing it for every instruction of the process. It fetches the instruction, it decodes the instruction to know the meaning of the fetched instruction, then it executes the instruction, and then it stores the result of the executed instruction. And this cycle is called the instruction cycle. Instruction cycle. So hopefully you're getting all these things. Now let's coming to the process scheduling part of the operating system. Okay, this was the process management, like when a process will go in which state. Okay, means when a process will be in the ready state, when a process will be in the running state, when the process will be waiting for an input output to be performed, and when a process will go to the terminating state. And see here, while waiting for the input output, when the input output is over, then the process goes to the ready state. So this is one kind of process management, and while running the process, again the CPU has to fetch all the instructions, decode all the instructions, execute all the instructions, and store the results of the execution of the instructions, and that is called the instruction cycle. So that's what the process management is. To deciding the various states of the process, to deciding the fetch, decode, execute, and store operations of instructions. These are the process management. Now let's see the process scheduling. Process scheduling. What are the various responsibilities under the process scheduling? Okay, so in this case, the operating system determines which process will get CPU time, which process will get CPU time. The second thing the operating system determines is which process has to be removed from the CPU? Which process has to be removed from the CPU? The third one is, which process has to be shifted to IO? Which process has to be shifted to IO? IO means input output. Okay, which process will be shifted to IO from the running? Okay, now the last decision is, what is to do in case interrupt occurs? What is to do in case if interrupt occurs? See, what is INTERRUPT? Interrupt. Interrupt means when a hardware or a software signals to the CPU about something bad happened. Okay, then in that case, CPU stops the current flow of execution and start doing something else, and that is called the interrupt. So process scheduler decides what to do when interrupt occurs. Okay, so which process will get the CPU time, which process will be removed from the CPU, which process has to be shifted to the input output, it means in the waiting state, and what is to do in the case if interrupt occurs. So these are decided by the scheduler of operating system. The process scheduling is the responsibility of the operating system. See, since all the processes in the memory have to share the CPU time, that's why the process scheduling becomes a very critical task of the operating system. And there are certain strategies by using which the operating system does the process scheduling. So let's see the strategies of the process scheduling. Strategies of process scheduling. Okay, one more point I want to say you. Sometimes you can say the process scheduling as CPU scheduling because the CPU time is being shared by the various processes. Therefore, the process scheduling is also called the CPU scheduling. You are scheduling the CPU also. Of course, you are scheduling the processes on the CPU, but you are scheduling the CPU also, that which process will be allowed on the CPU. So the process scheduling is also called the CPU scheduling. So what are the various strategies of the process scheduling? The first one is called first come, first served. First come, first served. Also called FCFS. Okay, means first come, first served. See, what happens under the FCFS? Under the FCFS, as the name suggests, the process first comes in the ready state will first go to the CPU. That's it. This is called the first come first serve. Okay. Then you have round robin scheduling. Round robin scheduling. Round robin scheduling. What happens in the round robin scheduling is, to understand the round robin scheduling, suppose that you have three processes P1, P2 and P3. All these three processes want to go to the CPU. The process P1 wants to stay on the CPU for 5 seconds. The process P2 wants to stay on the CPU for 3 seconds, and the process P3 wants to stay on the CPU for 4 seconds. What happens in the first come first service? Suppose that P1 comes first, P2 comes second, and P3 comes third. So P1 will go, stay there for 5 seconds and come. P2 will go, stay there for 3 seconds and come. P3 will go, stay there on the CPU for 4 seconds and come. This happens in the first come first serve. Now let's see what happens in the round robin. In the round robin, you define something called time quanta. Time quanta. Suppose that the time quanta is 2 seconds. What the time quanta means is, if a process goes to CPU, then it should not stay more than 2 seconds on the CPU. It should release the CPU after 2 seconds. Any process should release the CPU after 2 seconds. Does not matter if this process is done with its execution or not. It has to release the CPU after 2 seconds. So let's see how it works. First, the process P1 goes to the CPU, stay there for 2 seconds and come out. Then the process P2 goes to the CPU, stay there for 2 seconds and come out. Process P3 goes to the CPU, stay there for 2 seconds and come out. Now, this is a chance for the process P1. The process P1 goes to the CPU. How many seconds are remaining to complete the process P1 is 5 minus 2 is equal to 3. So process P1 again will stay there for 2 seconds and come out. How much time is remaining to complete P2 on the CPU is 1 second. 3 minus 2 is 1 second. Okay, 3 was total, 2 was already executed, so 1 second is remaining. So here the P1 will stay there for 1 second and come out. Then the process P3 will go to the CPU, stay there for 2 seconds and come out, because the P3 had the remaining time of 2 seconds. 4 minus 2 is equal to 2 seconds. Who still needs a CPU time? That is the process P1. The process P1 still needs a 1 second of CPU time. Okay, so the process P1 will again go to the CPU, stay there for 1 second. So this is called the round robin scheduling. Suppose that all these three people, P1, P2 and P3, are staying on the public water pump. Okay, P1 has to fill up 5 buckets, P2 has to fill up 3 buckets, P3 has to fill up 4 buckets. But everyone is allowed to fill just 2 buckets at a time. Okay, so P1 will be allowed to fill up only 2 buckets at the time. The P2 will allow to fill up just 2 buckets at the time. The P3 will allow to fill up just 2 buckets at the time. After that, P1 will fill up its remaining 2 buckets, P2 will fill up its remaining 1 buckets, and something like this happens. This is called the round robin scheduling. The third way of scheduling is called shortest job first scheduling. Shortest job first scheduling. Or you can also say shortest job next. Shortest job next scheduling. There is no such thing called time quanta in shortest job first or shortest job next. Delete it. What happens here is, in the shortest job first, the process who needs minimum CPU time will get the first chance. Therefore, here the P2 will get the first chance. The P3 will get the second chance on the CPU, and the P1 will get the third chance on the CPU. Okay, the process which needs less time on the CPU will get the first chance on the CPU. This is called the shortest job first scheduling. Okay, so this is all about the process scheduling part of the operating system. Now let's see the memory management part of the operating system. The memory management. As you have seen, multiple processes, multiple files resides in the main memory. Then how to manage the memory in order to get most out of it? Okay, so this strategy, the strategy of the operating system to manage the memory is called the memory management by the operating system. You know that whatever the things is being processed has to be loaded in the memory. There is a part of the operating system called the memory management unit or the memory manager. The memory manager performs following function. So I'm going to write here functionalities of the memory manager. Notice here is that the memory manager is also a part of the operating system. Functionalities of a memory manager. The first functionality is keep track of each and every memory location, regardless of either it is allocated or it is free. Okay, so keep track of free and allocated memory location. The second one, to decide which process will get memory at what time. Okay, to decide which process will get memory at what time. Okay, suppose that you have multiple processes executing in the system, then which process need to get the memory at what time? See, since multiple processes are executing in the memory, so their data should keep safe from each other. Okay, protect the data of the processes from each other. Okay, so these are the functionalities of a memory manager. Now, how the memory means how the RAM gets allocated. Okay, to allocate the RAM, to allocate the memory, there are different strategies. Okay, let's see the strategies of allocating memory. Strategies of allocating memory. What are the strategies you have to allocate memory? Okay, the first strategy is called single memory allocation. Single memory allocation. The single memory allocation is the simplest form of the memory allocation, in which the whole RAM means the whole memory is considered as one block and only one application can be put into this one block, and this is called the single memory allocation. With the single memory allocation, you can execute only one application at a time in the computer because only one application can be present in the memory at a time. So this strategy is called the single memory allocation strategy, and of course no one uses this strategy. The second strategy is called partitioned memory allocation. Partitioned memory allocation. What happens in this case is the memory block gets divided into the partitions, and every partition is being assigned to different processes executing. So here the memory can manage more than one applications together. This is called the partition allocations, in which different processes gets different partitions of the memory. Even one running application can be stored in more than one partition. Okay, or different partitions can store different applications. The third way is called paged memory management. PAGED, paged memory management or allocation. Paged memory management. What you do here is you have divided the memory into various partitions. Okay, now in the paged memory management, you divide the process also into the various partitions. So memory and process both are divided into the various partitions, and these partitions are of equal size. Okay, all the partitions are of equal size. So this is the memory and this is the process. Every partition of the memory is called a frame. A frame. And every partition of the process is called a page. The idea is that to assign a page to the memory when it is required. Okay, assign a page to the memory when it is required. Suppose that you have dozens of processes in the system, then you may have assigned 3 pages from process 1, 2 pages from the process 2, you have assigned 5 pages from the process 3 in the memory. So this is what you can do. You divide the processes into pages, divide the memory into frames, the size of page will be same as the size of frame, and allocate that page to the memory, means store that page into the frame which page is currently required. The fourth memory allocation technique is called segmented memory management. Okay, segmented memory management. In the segmented memory management, again the memory will be divided into various parts. One part is called a segment. A segment. Okay. And there will exist something called segment table. Segment table. Using this segment table, a process or a part of the process will be assigned into a segment. So that is called the segmented memory management. Like in paging, the process was divided into various pages. In segmentation, a process is divided into various segments. Okay, so this is the segment 1 of the process, this is the segment 2 of the process, dot 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 dot, and segment n of the process. The segment S1 will be loaded into the memory. Okay, segment S2 will be also loaded into the memory. The mapping of a segment to a particular partition of the memory happens through something called segment table. Segment table. So depending on the segment table, a segment of the process goes to any partition of the memory. This is called a segmented memory allocation. And this allocation is not guaranteed to be continuous. That means if S1 gets its allocation here in this partition, then S2 can get allocation in this partition. After the memory management, you have something called IO management, means input output management, in which you manage the hard disk, you manage all other input outputs like networking, like external peripherals, etc. So let's see IO management. IO management. The role of input output manager of operating system is to connect the process to actual input output device through some strategy. That means suppose that if a process want to connect to internet, then the job of IO manager is to connect that process to the internet. Like this is the job of IO manager to connect your browser to the internet. And this connection happens through some strategy. There are multiple strategies followed by the IO manager, which is beyond the scope of this book. Actually, there is IO manager. Okay, this is called the IO manager in the operating system. This is a part of operating system, and IO manager sends the request to a IO device. Suppose that it sends the request to the keyboard, and after getting the response from this device, the IO manager passes that response to the application which want to use the keyboard. See, IO manager is the part of operating system. The application first says the IO manager that it wants to access the keyboard. Then the IO manager says the keyboard that someone wants to access you. After getting the response from the keyboard, the IO manager says the application that yes, you can use the keyboard. And the same thing happens with other external devices, other IO devices. And when this application is waiting for the keyboard to listen to it, in that time the CPU is executing other applications. Means when an application is waiting for input output, the other application gets their chance on the CPU to execute. So that's how if the keyboard is busy with some applications, the CPU is also busy with some other applications. Apart from these four, your book is also mentioning few more managements, and one of them is virtual memory management. Virtual memory management. So before we learn about the virtual memory management, the first question is, what is the virtual memory? Okay. See, you have RAM. The RAM is the actual memory. But sometimes your RAM is not enough to store all the programs running in your computer. In that case, some part of disk, some part of hard disk is also treated as the RAM. And the part of hard disk which is treated as the RAM is called the virtual memory. Okay. So you have the 4 GB RAM, 4 GB RAM, and you have taken the 10 GB part of your disk and saying it as RAM. Okay, you are saying it this part of disk as RAM. Treating the disk as the virtual memory does not make it faster. Okay, treating the disk as a virtual memory only allows you to create more processes that are intended to be stored in the RAM. Of course, you have the process P1 staying on the virtual memory. Then to get this process P1 on the CPU, you need to take it to the RAM first. And from the RAM first, it will go to the CPU. But only difference is that apart from the normal exe file which remains in the dormant state on the disk, here the process P1 will live like an alive zombie, a living zombie. The process P1 will have those four parts of the process. That means the program code, global variables, stack and heap. It will not be a normal exe. If a process is on the virtual RAM part of the disk, then that process is not in the dormant state. That process is now an executing process. But of course, to actually execute it, we first need to transfer it to the RAM. So what happens here is I am just drawing a more clear picture. You have a RAM, you have 4 GB RAM, and you have the disk, the big disk. A part of this disk is treated as the 10 GB part of this disk is treated as virtual RAM. Okay, idea is that if suppose that the process P1 has to be executed, then that process P1 will be taken from the virtual memory to the actual memory. And suppose that the process P2 here is not going to be executed, is less likely to be executed, then the process P2 will move from the RAM to the virtual RAM. So the processes which are currently executing will be on the RAM, and the processes whose probability of execution is less will be moved down to the virtual RAM on the disk. The programs stays in the virtual RAM just like the process, just like the alive zombie, and that's it. Don't think that if the virtual RAM is on the disk, then it is not volatile. Okay, just like the RAM, the virtual memory part of the disk also gets deleted when you just switch off the computer. Okay, so the virtual memory is also volatile like RAM. The good thing with the virtual memory is that now you can have more processes in the execution state. Now you can have more executing processes than before, or you can create big processes according to the virtual RAM. Now your constraint is not the 4 GB RAM, but your constraint is 14 GB RAM, 10 GB here and 4 GB here. So now you can create a big process according to this 14 GB RAM. That is also an advantage. Okay, normally the data gets swapped between RAM and virtual memory. You can also say it virtual memory or virtual RAM. The data gets swapped between these two. The processes which has more probability of execution will stay in RAM, and the processes which has less probability of execution will stay in virtual memory. So after the virtual memory management, you have something called user interface. Let's see the user interface. User interface. Now listen to me carefully. You have the operating system, and the operating system is managing everything. That's great. But in order to do your work, you as a user need to interact with the operating system. But how you will able to interact with the operating system? Okay, the interaction of user with the operating system happens through the user interface. Okay, so there are two types of user interface exist in the world of operating system. The first one is graphical user interface. So whatever you're looking at now on my computer, everything is the graphical user interface. That means I can click on the icon to open my folder. Okay, I can click on various icons to do different works. I can right click, I can open the task manager, and I can do various things. So this is what the graphical user interface is. An user interface provided in the graphical way is called the graphical user interface. Normally, every person who is new to the computer can interact with the computer only through the graphical user interface. Okay, so through the graphical user interface, user interacts with the operating system through icons, menus, images, mouse, keyboard, or touch screen. And user need not know the complex commands to interact with the operating system. So what are the advantages of the graphical user interface? Tell me. The graphical user interface is easy to understand and even the new user can operate on them on their own. Means you do not need to learn how to use the Windows, how to play a song in the Windows. You can just switch on the computer and start working on it. Start playing your favorite song, start playing your game. This is the beauty of graphical user interface. It's very easy to use even for very naive user. The graphical user interface visually acknowledges and confirms each type of activities performed by the user. That means if I go somewhere and delete a file, then suppose that I want to delete this file. First, let's see what is there. Okay, there is nothing. So if I want to delete this file, I can right click and then I can click on delete. So this is how the graphical user interface acknowledges my work and confirms that what type of activity I want. I had to delete, so I deleted it. If I have to create, then I will right click again, I will click on new, I will click on folder, and I have created a new folder. So I am doing everything graphically. I am doing everything by using my mouse, by using clicks, etc. The graphical user interface enables the user to perform a number of tasks at the same time. Okay, this feature is known as the multitasking. But I don't think this is a special feature of graphical user interface. Even you can do the same with the command line interface also. I don't know why they have written this point here in your book. So it does not matter if it is the graphical user interface or it is the command line interface. You can perform number of tasks at the same time. This is a feature of both. Now talk about the command line interface. When you have to do something by using the command line. But now the question is how to open the command line. In Windows 10, click on this white box and type CMD and press enter. This is your command line interface. Here I can change the directory by writing the command line like cd desktop. I am on the desktop. dir. I am listing the files on the desktop. I can create the file by using the command line. I can delete the file by using the command line. By writing the command, I can do here everything. And this interface is called the command line interface. So with the graphical user interface, you have something called command line interface. So let's talk something formal about the command line interface. The command line interface is the non-graphical way of interaction of user with the operating system. Okay. The command line interface requires a user to type in commands as we did it in the CMD. So a command line interface requires a user to type in commands from a list of allowed commands. So this command line has various allowed commands. You can use those allowed commands to do your work. The command line interface or CLI, command line interface means CLI and graphical user interface means GUI. Let me write the short form here. Graphical user interface means GUI, command line interface means CLI. So you have two types of user interface. So the command line interface is text only interface. Okay, it does not have anything like graphics. using command line interface requires the knowledge of commands present in your system. Okay, and every different operating systems have their different set of commands. I have a good knowledge of Linux commands, but I don't have that good knowledge of Windows commands. So every operating system have different set of commands using which you can interact with that operating system through command line interface. Now there are few advantages of command line interface. The command line interface is faster than the graphical user interface. The command line interface is more flexible than the graphical user interface. To change something is easier in the command line interface than the graphical user interface. Okay, and the command line interface requires less memory, less RAM than the graphical user interface. So these were the two types of user interfaces through which an user interact with the operating system. So that's all about the operating system concepts in computer science with Python for class 11th. See you in the next video called cloud computing.